On the morning of the 15th of September 1940, Luftwaffe reconnaissance pilot Oberleutnant Werner Scholz photographed what appeared to be an utterly unremarkable collection of farm buildings near Tangmere in West Sussex. His intelligence report noted agricultural structures, 3 livestock shelters, hay storage, no military significance. 4 hours later, 12 Hawker Hurricanes emerged from those very livestock shelters and intercepted his squadron over Portsmouth, shooting down 3 Heinkel 11s before the Germans could react. Scholz survived and was captured. During interrogation, he stared at photographs of the Tangmere satellite field and insisted his intelligence had been correct. Those were clearly farm buildings. The RAF officer conducting the interview walked him to the window and pointed to a distant structure that looked precisely like a Sussex barn, complete with weathered timber cladding and a sagging roofline. That, the officer explained, houses 6 fighters and their ground crews. The cows you photographed this morning were made of canvas and wood. This wasn't a one-off trick or desperate improvisation. By August 1940, Britain had constructed 237 dummy airfields, complete K-sites with lighting, fake aircraft and illusory infrastructure, and disguised 54 operational forward airfields with elaborate camouflage that transformed modern military installations into seemingly ancient farmland. The Luftwaffe, equipped with the finest reconnaissance cameras German optics could produce, carrying Zeiss Econ aerial survey equipment capable of resolving details down to 30 centimeters from 4,000 meters altitude, repeatedly bombed empty fields, whilst real airfields operated with near impunity mere kilometers away. German intelligence officers would later call it Die Bauernhof-Täuschung, the farmhouse deception, and admit that even when they suspected camouflage, they couldn't risk ignoring what might be genuine military targets. What seemed like an admission of technological inferiority, hiding modern air bases behind fake haystacks because Britain couldn't protect them properly, was actually a sophisticated understanding of how aerial reconnaissance worked, and, more importantly, how target selection committees made decisions under pressure. Standard Luftwaffe doctrine in 1940 emphasized what they called Schwerpunktprinzip, the principle of concentrated force applied to clearly identified high-value targets. Their intelligence methodology, refined during the Spanish Civil War and the Polish campaign, relied on 3-stage verification: initial reconnaissance photography, comparative analysis against known airfield specifications, and final confirmation through signals intelligence or agent reports. The system worked brilliantly against conventional military installations. Polish airfields at Okęcie and Rakowice were identified, catalogued and destroyed within the first 72 hours of September 1939. The Luftwaffe's reconnaissance units, particularly Aufklärungsgruppe 122, equipped with modified Dornier Do 17P aircraft, could photograph 150 square kilometers in a single sortie and have interpreted images on commanders' desks within 6 hours. British Air Ministry planners looked at these same results and drew a different conclusion. Air Commodore John Slessor, Director of Plans, wrote in a March 1939 memorandum, "The Germans are superb at finding airfields. We must therefore ensure that what they find either doesn't matter or isn't what they think it is." This wasn't defeatism. It was a recognition that Britain's defensive posture required a different approach to the German offensive doctrine. Whilst Germany could concentrate its Luftwaffe squadrons on a handful of massive, heavily defended airfields in occupied France, places like Abbeville-Drucat with its 2,400-metre concrete runways and underground fuel storage, Britain needed its fighters dispersed across dozens of small fields to maintain coverage over the entire country. The mathematical reality was stark. Fighter command required aircraft within 15 minutes flying time of any point along Britain's coastline. This meant fields every 80 kilometres at minimum, preferably closer. But reconnaissance mathematics were equally unforgiving. A standard Luftwaffe reconnaissance sortie photographed a corridor approximately 45 kilometres wide. A single Do-17 could cover Kent from Margate to Dover in 20 minutes. Any airfield with the characteristic signature, intersecting runways, obvious blast pens, fuel bowsers, the telltale scatter of aircraft dispersal, would be photographed, identified and scheduled for attack. The British response was architecturally audacious. Rather than accept this detection-destruction cycle, they would break the second stage, interpretation. Colonel John Turner, appointed Director of Camouflage in April 1940, established what he called the principle of plausible falsification. His directive to contractors was precise. We're not attempting to make airfields invisible. We're ensuring that when the enemy sees them, he sees something else entirely, and that something else must be so utterly mundane that it warrants no second glance. The first prototype disguised hangar was completed at RAF Hawking on 12th of May 1940, 3 days after Churchill became Prime Minister. The structure itself was a standard 1936 pattern general service flight shed, a steel frame building measuring 45.7 metres wide by 24.4 metres deep, capable of housing 3 fighters with wingspans up to 12.2 metres. From ground level, it looked precisely as it was, a modern industrial structure, but from 3,000 metres altitude, the typical reconnaissance height, it had been transformed. The transformation involved 127 separate architectural interventions. The flat roof was covered with corrugated sheeting weathered with acid and tar to simulate decades of agricultural use, then overlaid with painted canvas sections, creating the visual texture of mismatched repairs. False timber framing was attached to the steel walls using brackets specifically designed to cast shadows identical to those of traditional post and beam construction. The entrance, a modern roller door 15.2 metres wide, was faced with hinged wooden panels painted to resemble individual barn doors. When closed, these panels featured carefully researched details. Wrought iron hinges copying Sussex blacksmith patterns from the 1880s, wooden cross beams with weathering that showed darker patches where rain would naturally accumulate, even realistic woodworm holes drilled with 3mm bits at statistically appropriate intervals. What made this work wasn't any single detail, but rather the systematic application of what Turner called reconnaissance psychology. Luftwaffe photo interpreters examined thousands of images daily, making rapid judgments based on pattern recognition. They looked for military characteristics, geometric precision, modern materials, fresh construction, vehicle tracks and standardized patterns. Turner's team provided the opposite: organic irregularity, traditional materials, apparent age, and the random scatter of agricultural use. The roof treatment was particularly sophisticated. Analysis of German photographs showed they relied heavily on roof texture and colour to identify building types. Military structures use consistent materials: corrugated iron, asbestos cement, tarred felt, creating uniform reflectance. Rural buildings showed patchwork repairs accumulated over decades. The Hawking camouflage used 7 different materials in carefully random patches: original weathered corrugated iron, painted canvas sections in 3 slightly different shades of rust, actual rusted metal panels salvaged from demolished barns, and sections of tarred felt deliberately frayed at the edges. From above it read as exactly what it was meant to be: a farm building kept barely functional through generations of make-do repairs. The ground treatment surrounding these structures was equally critical. Luftwaffe interpreters identified military installations partly through the approaches: hard-surfaced roads, geometric parking areas, fuel points marked by dark staining. The camoufleurs created desire paths, the wandering tracks that appear where people and animals actually walk, as opposed to where planners design paths. These tracks were created using different materials at different points: crushed stone near the hangar entrance where vehicles would actually need firm ground, but transitioning to mud and grass in areas where only foot traffic would occur. Piles of agricultural debris, broken fencing, rusted equipment, stacked timber were positioned to partially block direct approaches, forcing vehicles to navigate around them. This served dual purposes: It looked utterly authentic to aerial reconnaissance, and it actually concealed the fact that vehicles could easily maneuver around these obstacles when necessary. The Hawkinger prototype was tested on the 18th of May 1940 by RAF reconnaissance pilots who had been briefed only to photograph suspect camouflage installations. Of 8 pilots, 6 reported the structure as agricultural, no military significance. One noted possible storage shed, likely civilian. Only one correctly identified it as military, and only because he had been stationed at Hawkinger before the camouflage was applied and recognised the location. When the same photographs were shown to a captured Luftwaffe intelligence officer, he marked it as Scheune landwirtschaftlich, barn landwirtschaftlich agricultural, without hesitation. By July 1940, as the Luftwaffe intensified reconnaissance flights preparatory to what would become the Battle of Britain, 28 airfields had received full camouflage treatment. The scale of this program was extraordinary. RAF Tangmere, one of Fighter Command's crucial forward airfields, required 14 weeks to fully camouflage. The base hosted 43 squadron-flying Hawker Hurricanes and 601 squadron-flying Supermarine Spitfires, approximately 32 operational fighters plus reserves. The camouflage scheme transformed 3 1936 pattern hangars into agricultural buildings, constructed 16 fake haystacks, each concealing either fuel bowsers or ground crew equipment, planted 1,200 linear meters of hedgerow to break up the geometric lines of taxiways, and created an entire false farm complex including a main farmhouse, actually the officers' mess, dairy barn, equipment stores, and cattle shelter, armoury. The costs were significant but justified by cold calculation. Each Tangmere camouflage hangar cost £3,400 to construct and disguise, approximately the price of a new Hurricane fighter. But a single successful Luftwaffe raid could destroy 6 fighters, plus fuel, ammunition, and facilities worth over £200,000. When Tangmere was bombed on the 16th of August 1940, the Luftwaffe attacked what they believed to be the main hangars, 3 obvious military structures they had identified in reconnaissance photos from the 14th of August. Those hangars were actually empty storage sheds at the decoy field 2.4 kilometres northeast. The 3 disguised hangars, each containing ground crews working on fighters, were untouched. The raid destroyed 1 dummy Spitfire, constructed from wood and canvas at a cost of £15, damaged 2 empty buildings, and created 3 bomb craters in an empty field. The real Tangmere launched 19 fighters that afternoon, contributing to the day's claims of 71 Luftwaffe aircraft destroyed. The success wasn't universal, however, and the failures were instructive. RAF Kenley, another crucial 11 group sector station, received elaborate camouflage including disguised hangars and dummy aircraft dispersal areas. On August 18, 1940, it was devastated by a low-level attack that destroyed or damaged 10 Hurricanes, killed 9 personnel, and temporarily knocked out the operations room. The reason was grimly simple. A Luftwaffe intelligence officer had obtained a pre-war tourist photograph showing Kenley's layout, and pilots were briefed to navigate by the distinctive pattern of 3 large hangars in a row. The camouflage made these hangars look like something else from above, but their position and silhouette were unchanged. German bombers approached at 15 meters altitude, below the effective ceiling of camouflage illusion, and attacked based on position rather than identification. This failure drove immediate changes to camouflage doctrine. Turner's team began incorporating what they called displacement architecture, not merely disguising structures but altering their apparent location through forced perspective and dummy construction. At RAF Duxford, this meant building false hangar fronts 90 meters from the real structures, creating the visual impression that the buildings were in a different position than they actually occupied. At night, these false fronts were lit with minimal blackout-safe lighting, creating the subtle glow that would leak from poorly blacked-out buildings, whilst the real structures remained completely dark. What the British camoufleurs understood, and what made their deceptions effective even when they weren't perfect, was that Luftwaffe target selection operated under severe time pressure and risk aversion. Major Hermann Göring's directive for the Battle of Britain emphasised Vernichtung der britischen Jagdwaffe, destruction of British fighter forces. This meant targeting airfields where fighters were based, fuel dumps, maintenance facilities, and command infrastructure. Intelligence officers at Luftflotte 2 and Luftflotte 3 headquarters received reconnaissance photographs and had to make rapid determinations: which targets were genuine, which were most valuable, which could be successfully attacked. A Luftwaffe intelligence summary from August 1940, captured after the war, reveals their methodology. Airfield classification: Category A, confirmed, fighter base, multiple large hangars, obvious dispersal, recent activity. Category B, probable fighter base, visible aircraft or structures requires confirmation. Category C, possible military use, ambiguous characteristics, low priority. Category D, agricultural or civilian, no military significance. The British camouflage programme was designed to push genuine fighter bases from Category A to Category C or D, whilst decoy airfields were constructed to appear as Category A targets. The time pressure was critical. Luftwaffe bomber crews required detailed briefing on targets, approach routes, and defences. This briefing process took 2 to 3 hours minimum. Intelligence officers couldn't afford to spend days analysing ambiguous photographs. When confronted with an image showing structures that might be disguised hangars or might be genuine barns, the rational choice under time pressure was to classify as possible military, low priority, and focus resources on obvious confirmed targets. This is exactly what Turner's team was counting on. The effectiveness of this approach is documented in Luftwaffe attack records. Between 10 July and 31 October 1940, the official Battle of Britain period, the Luftwaffe conducted 127 separate raids classified as airfield attacks in their records. Of these, 61 targeted actual operational airfields, 44 targeted decoy or dummy airfields, and 22 targeted installations that had been camouflaged as civilian or agricultural sites. Of the 61 genuine airfield attacks, only 19 achieved significant damage to hangars or aircraft. The remainder either bombed the wrong section of the field, attacking dummy dispersal areas whilst camouflaged hangars remained untouched, or attacked at the wrong time, hitting fields that appeared busy with aircraft that were actually models or after real fighters had been dispersed to satellite strips. The most successful deception occurred at RAF Middle Wallop on the 14th of August 1940. Luftwaffe intelligence had correctly identified Middle Wallop as a fighter base, home to 609 Squadron, Spitfires, and 238 Squadron, Hurricanes. What their photographs showed was a standard pre-war airfield with 3 prominent hangars arranged in a characteristic RAF pattern. At 12:45 hours, 15 Junkers Ju-88 bombers from KG-54 attacked these hangars with 250 kilogram bombs, scoring direct hits on all 3 structures and creating extensive cratering on what appeared to be the main dispersal area. German crews reported hangars destroyed, multiple aircraft damaged on ground, intense fires observed. The reality: they had bombed 3 empty hangars at the decoy site 1.8 kilometers west of the actual field. The 3 burning aircraft were wrecked Hurricane fuselages that had been declared beyond repair and positioned as decoys specifically to create convincing fire and smoke when hit. The real Middle Wallop, its hangars disguised as farm buildings, launched 8 Spitfires and 6 Hurricanes during the raid. These fighters intercepted the Ju-80s on their return flight, shooting down 3 and damaging 5 others. The paradox at the heart of British camouflage was that it didn't need to be perfect, it needed to be plausibly imperfect. A disguise that looked too good raised suspicions. Turner's team deliberately incorporated what he called tells of authenticity, small details that proved a structure was genuinely old and agricultural rather than recently disguised. Consider the treatment of a disguised hangar at RAF Warmwell in Dorset. The structure was camouflaged to resemble a large threshing barn typical of South England grain farms. The camouflage team didn't simply paint agricultural colours and add false timber. They researched actual barns in the region, noting that genuine agricultural buildings of that size always showed signs of modification over decades. Doors relocated as farming practices changed, roof sections repaired with whatever material was available at the time, walls showing different weathering patterns where equipment had been stored against them. The Warmwell hangar received extraordinarily detailed treatment. One corner of the roof was deliberately allowed to sag by 15 centimetres, achieved by loosening roof supports in a section that wasn't structurally critical. This sagging was visible in aerial photographs and exactly matched the appearance of barns, where roof timbers had settled over decades. One false door was hung slightly askew, consistent with buildings where hinges had worn and door frames had shifted. Most ingeniously, the painted weathering on the timber cladding showed lighter patches in horizontal lines at heights of 1.2 metres and 1.8 metres, precisely where wooden rails would have been attached for livestock pens, and where the wood would have been protected from weather exposure for years before the rails were removed. This level of detail seems obsessive, but it was based on hard evidence about what photo interpreters actually looked for. Intelligence assessments recovered from captured German reconnaissance units showed that interpreters had been trained to identify camouflage through what they called Ordnung Anomalien, order anomalies. Camouflage, they reasoned, was applied systematically to military structures, which meant it would show systematic patterns. Real agricultural buildings showed unsystematic accumulation of changes over time. The British camouflage programme therefore had to be systematically unsystematic, carefully random in ways that mimicked genuine organic development. Pilot Officer Michael Roth, serving with Aufklärungsgruppe 123, wrote in his diary, recovered from his crashed aircraft in October 1940, "We are told to look for patterns. Buildings too uniform, too well maintained, too geometric. But England is covered with thousands of farms and every bloody barn looks different from every other. The interpreters say, look for fresh construction. But how do you identify fresh construction when the British paint everything to look like it's falling apart? We photograph buildings that intelligence marks as civilian. Then the same buildings appear in combat reports when fighters emerge from them. There is a systematic deception occurring, but we cannot determine the system." This confusion was exactly what Turner intended. In a post-war interview, he explained, "The Germans had excellent reconnaissance and excellent analysis. What defeated them was volume and variation. We presented them with thousands of potential targets, each slightly different, each ambiguous in slightly different ways. Under operational pressure, they had to make rapid classifications. We ensured that rapid classification would be wrong more often than right. Daylight camouflage was challenging enough. Night operations presented entirely different problems. The Luftwaffe shifted to nighttime bombing in September 1940, partly because of unsustainable daylight losses and partly because darkness made British fighter interception more difficult. But darkness also made target identification far more difficult for the attackers. The British response was the Starfish Sight, Special Fire Sight. These were elaborate decoys designed to simulate burning cities or airfields, drawing bombers away from genuine targets. But the more sophisticated night deception involved what was called lighting discipline camouflage, controlling not just what was visible in daylight, but what could be detected at night through blackout breaches, signal fires, or industrial glow. Disguised hangars received special treatment for night operations. The fundamental problem was that aircraft hangars needed working light inside. Mechanics couldn't service fighters in complete darkness. But any light leak would immediately identify a structure as military rather than agricultural. The solution was a double-envelope design. Existing hangars were fitted with internal blackout screens positioned 2.4 meters inside the external walls. This created an air gap that prevented light from reaching the outer walls, where even tiny cracks might allow detectable leakage. The outer agricultural shell could then be fitted with carefully positioned, very low-intensity lights that simulated the blackout behaviour of an actual farm. This simulation was remarkably detailed. Farms in 1940. Britain were required to observe blackout regulations, but compliance was imperfect in rural areas where the risks of bombing seemed remote. Intelligence analysis showed that rural buildings typically showed minimal light leakage, perhaps the faint glow of a single window inadequately covered, or the brief flash of a door opening. The camouflaged hangars were fitted with exactly this pattern, dim red lights positioned behind small gaps in the timber cladding, creating the appearance of inadequate blackout coverage. These lights were on timers that randomly switched on and off, mimicking the pattern of someone moving through a building with a torch. The sophistication extended to thermal signature. Hangars with aircraft inside were warmer than empty agricultural buildings, particularly in winter. The double envelope design provided insulation that reduced this thermal difference. But more cleverly, small heating elements were installed in the outer shell of some disguised hangars, creating warm spots that simulated livestock, which would be brought inside barns in cold weather or stored machinery. These weren't uniform heat. They were positioned to create the irregular thermal pattern of a working farm building, rather than the uniform signature of a heated military facility. Night camouflage was tested against RAF Bomber Command's own reconnaissance flights. Pilots briefed to identify military installations by night observation repeatedly missed camouflaged fields whilst correctly identifying decoy sites that were designed to draw attention. Squadron leader Peter Townsend, who flew night operations from RAF Duxford, later wrote, "We knew which fields were real and which were decoys. We flew from them daily. But looking down at night, I honestly couldn't distinguish our own hangars from the farm buildings nearby. The whole area looked like dark countryside with occasional very faint lights that might have been anything." Assessing the effectiveness of camouflage is notoriously difficult because success means nothing happened. Targets weren't identified, weren't bombed, weren't destroyed. But fragmentary evidence from multiple sources provides a quantifiable picture. Luftwaffe intelligence assessments at the end of August 1940 listed 47 confirmed fighter airfields in southern England. Actual fighter command bases in the same region numbered 63. This means 16 operational fighter bases, 25% of the total, were not recognised as military installations by German intelligence. These 16 included RAF Friston, Merston, Staplehurst and West Malling, all of which were heavily camouflaged satellite fields that operated continuously throughout the Battle of Britain, whilst being classified by German intelligence as either agricultural or status uncertain. Bomb damage records are equally revealing. Fighter command airfields that received full camouflage treatment before August 1940 suffered an average of 2.3 major raids, defined as attacks by 12 plus aircraft, during the August-October period. Fields without systematic camouflage suffered an average of 6.7 major raids. When raids did occur on camouflaged fields, the average number of aircraft destroyed on the ground was 1.4, compared to 4.2 for uncamouflaged fields. This suggests that even when camouflage bases were attacked, the camouflage often caused bombs to fall in the wrong locations, hitting dummy dispersals or decoy structures rather than actual aircraft and hangars. The most compelling evidence comes from Luftwaffe documents themselves. A situation report from Luftflotte 3 dated 7th September 1940 notes, "Intelligence regarding RAF airfield locations and capacity remains uncertain. Reconnaissance confirms presence of aircraft at known major bases, Biggin Hill, Kenley, Northolt, Hornchurch, but fighters continue to operate from locations not identified in reconnaissance. Suspected presence of camouflaged forward fields or satellite strips that cannot be distinguished from civilian installations. Recommend continued attacks on confirmed major bases rather than dispersing effort against uncertain targets." This assessment reveals exactly what British camouflage aimed to achieve. Not perfect concealment, which was impossible, but sufficient uncertainty to focus enemy effort on a limited number of obvious targets. Those obvious targets, the major sector stations, had to absorb heavy attacks. But by preserving the satellite and forward fields, Fighter Command maintained operational flexibility and dispersion. When Biggin Hill was heavily damaged on the 30th of August 1940, its squadron simply relocated to satellite strips at Gravesend and Manston, operating from camouflaged temporary facilities whilst main base repairs were completed. Camouflage wasn't a perfect defence, and the British never claimed it was. Several factors could defeat even the most sophisticated disguise. Human intelligence was the most dangerous weakness. A single German agent with local knowledge could identify which barn actually housed fighters, rendering elaborate camouflage irrelevant. This was the primary reason for Britain's extensive counterintelligence operations during 1940. The MI5 double-cross system wasn't merely about capturing German spies. It was about ensuring that the Germans' human intelligence either confirmed the deceptions through turned agents providing false information, or was completely absent. Weather was another challenge. Camouflaged hangars relied on visual deception, paint, false materials, shadow effects. But in heavy rain, different materials weathered differently. Canvas sections of camouflage would darken when wet, whilst actual weathered timber became lighter as water removed surface dust. From high altitude in poor weather, these differences were invisible, but if Luftwaffe reconnaissance caught a partially disguised hangar immediately after rain had stopped before everything dried, the differential weathering could reveal the deception. Thermal and electromagnetic signatures were perhaps the greatest technical challenge. Camouflage addressed visual and photographic reconnaissance brilliantly, but it couldn't hide everything. An active radar station, even if visually disguised as a water tower or farm building, still emitted powerful radio waves. Aircraft engines being tested in hangars created distinctive sound signatures. The large-scale movement of vehicles and personnel necessary for airfield operations created vibrations, dust, and trackways that accumulated over time despite the best efforts at concealment. Most significantly, operational security couldn't always be maintained. RAF fighters had to fly from these airfields. During intensive operations, they might launch and land dozens of times per day. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights specifically timed to catch these operational moments could observe fighters in the air near agricultural buildings or spot aircraft on temporarily clear sections of camouflaged runways during landing approaches. A Luftwaffe report from September 1940 notes, visual observation of fighter aircraft landing near grid reference TQ2-35089, marked in reconnaissance as agricultural area. Recommend reassessment of classification. Location likely forward fighter strip despite apparent absence of military infrastructure. The British response to these limitations was pragmatic rather than perfectionist. Colonel Turner's assessment was characteristically blunt. Camouflage cannot make airfields invisible and certainly cannot make them invulnerable. The objective is to introduce sufficient uncertainty that the enemy must waste resources verifying targets before attacking and must divide forces between genuine and deceptive installations. If camouflage forces the Luftwaffe to photograph a field 4 times instead of once and to attack with reconnaissance flights before committing bombers, we've achieved our purpose. Every hour they spend identifying targets is an hour Fighter Command uses to regroup and repair. What made British airfield camouflage effective wasn't any single technical feature, though the technical execution was often brilliant. It was the integration of camouflage into a broader defensive strategy that recognised Britain's fundamental position in 1940. Germany had every advantage except time. The Luftwaffe was larger, more experienced, and operated from bases closer to British targets than British aircraft could reach German territory. German reconnaissance was better equipped and better trained. German intelligence analysis was methodical and generally accurate. In any straightforward military exchange, Britain would lose. The Battle of Britain would be decided by Germany's ability to achieve air superiority before the autumn weather made invasion impossible, or before British production could replace losses. Camouflage attacked this time pressure. Every disguised airfield that went unidentified, every decoy that drew bombs, every misclassified target that appeared in intelligence reports, these were friction, delay and uncertainty injected into German operational planning. The Luftwaffe needed to destroy fighter command's infrastructure faster than it could be repaired or dispersed. Camouflage didn't prevent destruction, but it slowed the rate of effective attacks. The mathematics are stark. Fighter Command possessed approximately 700 operational fighters in July 1940. British aircraft production was manufacturing roughly 470 new fighters per month. German attacks were destroying or damaging approximately 280 fighters per month, including ground losses. This left a narrow margin. If German attacks could be made 30% less effective through a combination of missed targets, wasted ordnance on decoys, and misallocated effort, British production could outpace losses. Camouflage, integrated with radar early warning, dispersal tactics, and aggressive defence, provided exactly this margin. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, Fighter Command's commander, understood this perfectly. In a November 1940 assessment, he wrote, "We won the Battle of Britain through the narrow margin provided by those factors that prevented the enemy from achieving the concentration of force his superiority should have permitted. Radar gave us knowledge, dispersal gave us resilience, camouflage gave us confusion, confusion in enemy planning, confusion in target selection, confusion in battle damage assessment." The Hurricane and Spitfire fought magnificently, but they would have been overwhelmed if forced to defend static, easily identified bases against a concentrated enemy. Concealment and deception allowed us to fight on our terms rather than theirs. British airfield camouflage during 1940 established principles that extended far beyond the Battle of Britain. The techniques developed, systematic analysis of enemy reconnaissance capabilities, integration of deception into operational planning, use of physical camouflage with electromagnetic and signals deception, became foundational to military deception doctrine. By 1942, camouflage and deception had evolved from tactical improvisation to strategic program. Operation Fortitude, the deception plan for D-Day, employed many of the same principles developed in 1940. Dummy installations, an entire fictional army group, disguised actual preparations, camouflaging assembly areas for genuine invasion forces, and exploitation of enemy reconnaissance methodology, providing evidence that confirmed German preconceptions about invasion location. The success of Fortitude, convincing Germany that Normandy was a diversion whilst the main invasion would strike at Calais, owed much to lessons learned from convincing the Luftwaffe that fighter bases were farm buildings. The architectural techniques also evolved. Post-war research revealed that the double-envelope hangar design developed for blackout purposes had unexpected benefits for blast protection and thermal management. Modern hardened aircraft shelters use similar principles, an outer sacrificial shell that can be quickly repaired or replaced, surrounding an inner protective envelope housing the actual aircraft. The concept of plausible falsification, making military installations resemble civilian structures, became standard practice in denied areas and conflict zones. But perhaps the most significant legacy was conceptual. Colonel Turner articulated it in a 1946 lecture. "We learned that in modern warfare, appearance is reality until proven otherwise. The enemy cannot attack everything, cannot investigate every ambiguity, cannot verify every target. Under operational pressure, assumptions will be made. If you control those assumptions, you control the enemy's decision-making process. A fake barn that draws bombs is, in every practical sense, as valuable as a genuine fighter that shoots down an enemy aircraft. Both remove enemy resources from the battle. The fake cowsheds of 1940 looked exactly like what they were supposed to be. Slightly shabby, utterly ordinary, completely unremarkable farm buildings scattered across the English countryside. That they concealed Spitfires and Hurricanes, that they persisted as military installations whilst being photographed and classified as agricultural, that they contributed to the narrow margin by which Fighter Command survived the summer and autumn of 1940. All this was invisible to aerial reconnaissance because it was designed to be invisible. The Luftwaffe took them for barns because every detail, from weathered timber to sagging rooflines to apparently random debris, insisted they were barns. This wasn't a failure of German reconnaissance, it was the success of a defensive strategy that recognized technological inferiority could be overcome through psychological sophistication. Britain couldn't build more fighters than Germany, faster than they were destroyed. Britain couldn't hide its airfields from reconnaissance cameras that could resolve details from thousands of meters altitude. But Britain could ensure that what those cameras photographed was interpreted incorrectly often enough to matter. In warfare, often enough to matter is sometimes all you need. The pilots who scrambled from disguised hangars, who landed at camouflage strips that appeared in German intelligence as agricultural, no military significance, won the Battle of Britain through courage and skill. But they were enabled to fight by the painters, carpenters and camoufleurs who understood that in the modern age, victory might depend as much on what the enemy believes they see as on what they actually encounter. The Luftwaffe expected to find Britain's fighters concentrated at obvious, identifiable airfields. Instead, they encountered fighters rising from fake farms, and that confusion, multiplied across hundreds of sorties and dozens of targets, proved to be a strategic weapon every bit as decisive as radar or the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine.